Pentagram City never slept. That was not poetry. It was architecture permanent, pervasive, and indifferent to anyone's preference. The neon signs along Brimstone Boulevard had been flickering the same broken sequences for 3 decades. The casino on the corner of 7th and Ash pumped recycled smoke through cracked vents with the mechanical commitment of a city that had long since stopped pretending to maintain itself. A massive screen on the building opposite cycled through advertisements with the speed of something that assumed attention was owed rather than earned. A cologne ad, a weapons dealer, a 30-second spot for Vox's latest broadcast package, all delivered in the same shrieking primary colors. The clubs on the lower blocks did not play music so much as manufacture pressure, something felt in the sternum before it registered in the ear. Pride Ring ran on a single, unbroken frequency, and that frequency was loud red and convinced of its own importance. The Hazbin Hotel sat a little apart from the worst of it. Not far, nothing in Pentagram City was ever truly far from anything else, but enough that the building held its own atmosphere the way a candle holds its own atmosphere in a room that is otherwise on fire. Charlie Morningstar had designed it that way, or at least tried to. The hotel was warm, where the city was cruel, and it operated on the optimistic assumption that the souls crammed into this corner of hell were capable of something other than what they currently were. Most residents of Pentagram City found this adorable. A few found it suspicious. The rest had not bothered forming an opinion because forming opinions required attention they preferred to spend elsewhere. It was deep into what passed for night. The sky had bled from arterial red to dried rust when the air above the hotel's roof split. Not dramatically. No column of light, no dimensional crack tearing itself open with ceremony. No sound that would have qualified as a warning. The air simply gave way for a fraction of a second, the way fabric does when something sharp moves through it faster than the fabric can respond. Then, the moment was over, and something had arrived that had not been there before. The impact hit the roof hard enough to travel. Every loose piece of signage on the hotel's upper facade rattled in its mounting. The birds, the warped, smog-adapted things that roosted near the chimney, scattered without a cry, as though they had reached a unanimous decision about the situation. 3 floors below, a glass on the bar counter walked itself to the edge and stopped vibrating. Angel Dust, mid-argument with his own reflection, paused. Husk, who had been ignoring everything with professional discipline, looked up from his drink. Neither spoke. The building had gone quiet in a way that buildings do not normally go quiet. Not the quiet of absence, but of held breath. Something above them had changed the pressure in the air, and the change had moved downward through walls and floors and settled into the room like a hand placed flat on a table. On the roof, Vegeta stood up. He had landed in a crouch, one knee against the tar surface, one arm braced. He rose without hurry, not because he lacked urgency, but because urgency implied uncertainty, and he had none. His armor was undamaged. His ki was stable. He ran a brief internal assessment, the kind that takes under a second, when a person has spent decades mapping the precise edges of what they are capable of, and confirmed he was intact and standing somewhere he had no prior information on. He looked at the city. The city continued existing at full volume. The signs, the smoke, the grinding pulse from the clubs below the layered architectural chaos of a place built entirely by impulse, floor on floor on floor of it, no governing logic, no style except accumulation. The sky was the wrong color. The geometry of the taller buildings leaned in ways that suggested either intention or catastrophic indifference. The smell hid in layers, sulfur first. Then something burned sweet underneath, then below. That something organic and too warm. Something his instincts logged under hostile without requiring elaboration. He had been in worse places. He had been in places that made this look hospitable. But he had not been in a place quite like this one. And the specific character of its wrongness was something he cataloged the way a fighter catalogs a new arena methodically before committing to any movement. Then the air around him did something. It was not a decision he made consciously. His body had simply been present for long enough that the ambient energy of the place had registered what was standing in it and adjusted accordingly. The rooftop felt heavier, not structurally, nothing cracked, nothing bent. But the quality of the air changed the way it changes. In the second before lightning, a compression that the chest recognizes before the mind does. Below on the street, a cluster of sinners who had been loitering on the opposite sidewalk went still. Two of them looked up. Then one of them found somewhere else to be. Then another. Then all of them, quietly without discussion, had somewhere else to be. They had not seen anything happen. They had felt it a pressure below the threshold of sound, something very old in the spine that said, something is here that is not like the other things. Vegeta had not spiked his Kai. He had not transformed, not released anything deliberate. He had simply been standing there, and standing there was enough. The sign above the hotel's main entrance, a stylized pink arrow, went dark. Oh my gosh. The voice came from below the eave, then from the fire escape, the fast light rhythm of someone climbing quickly, driven by genuine alarm, and the kind of enthusiasm that does not stop to ask whether enthusiasm is the correct response. He did not turn around. He waited. Charlie Morningstar pulled herself onto the roof, slightly out of breath, her coat snagging the railing. She had already started talking before she fully straightened. "Hi, hello. Are you okay? I heard something hit the roof, and I thought, are you a new arrival? Because the transit can be really disorienting. Especially if it was unexpected and we have rooms available, and the hotel has a whole program. It's about redemption, which I know sounds like a lot immediately, but it's actually a really supportive environment, and..." Vegeta turned around. Charlie stopped talking. He had not done anything threatening. He looked at her, that was all. His expression was the default setting of a face that had decided long ago the world did not deserve performance. Flat assessing and faintly contemptuous in the way of someone who had already categorized the situation before the other person finished their sentence. "I'm not a resident." His voice was low and even, the voice of someone who had never needed volume. "Oh, okay," Charlie adjusted. "You're still welcome to come inside. The hotel is open to..." "I don't need a hotel." "Right, I just meant..." She stopped. Reset. Tried again with the stubborn cheerfulness of someone who had practiced this kind of conversation. "I'm Charlie. This is my hotel. What's your name?" A pause. Not long. Long enough to make clear the question had been received and would be answered in his own sequence. "Vegeta." She repeated it, testing the weight. "Okay. And what's a say in..." He glanced at her. The question had surprised him slightly. Not because it was unusual, but because it confirmed his earlier categorization of her as someone who would ask it aloud rather than file it away. "A warrior. A race. Mine." "Okay." The tone of someone storing information for later. He had already turned back to the skyline. Charlie hovered, uncertain whether the exchange was over or suspended. It ended when Vaggie came through the roof access door. She had not taken the fire escape. She had come through the building at speed, which meant she had heard enough to decide that Charlie being up here alone was not acceptable. She stepped out with her spear low, not raised, but present-angled at a position that said, ready without saying. Committed, and moved herself between Charlie and the stranger in one efficient motion. Her eyes swept Vegeta the way someone trained to read threat reads a threat. Former exorcist, she had spent years learning how danger distributes itself through a body, how it sits in posture and weight, and in the specific quality of stillness that means controlled rather than calm. she found what she was reading for almost immediately. Her jaw set. "Charlie, step back." "Vaggie, he's fine, he just landed." "Charlie." No volume required. Charlie stepped back, expression firmly registering her opinion of this decision. Vegeta had not looked at Vaggie when she came through the door. He looked at her now. Brief, assessing. Then back to the skyline. "Lower that if you want." No inflection. "I have no reason to start something with either of you." Vaggie did not lower it. "You landed on the roof of our hotel. I landed on the nearest solid surface. Your roof was there." A pause. It held. "That's not..." She stopped. "Who are you?" He said Vegeta, Charlie offered. "I heard." Vaggie's grip had not shifted. Something in her assessment of him had moved past tactical and into something her training was still trying to name. It was not fear exactly she had faced worse, had been worse in another life. It was the alertness of someone standing very close to a thing that is quiet by choice, not by nature, and knowing with absolute clarity that the choice could end. "What are you?" she asked. "A Saiyan, a warrior." He let that sit a moment. Currently standing in a city that manages to be grotesque and tedious at the same time. That combination is rarer than you'd think. Charlie's expression did something complicated. She recognized the insult. She also moved around it the way she moved around most difficult things, searching for the angle that led somewhere useful. "It doesn't have to be like this." Her voice carried the particular brightness of someone who has rehearsed hope until it became muscle memory. That's literally why the hotel exists. People can change, even here. He looked at her again, this time a beat longer than before. "You believe that?" Not a question. The tone of someone noting that a person has chosen to build on an active fault line, not mockery, but clear-eyed acknowledgement of the distance between hope and ground. "I do," Charlie answered. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, something compressed somewhere between dismissal and acknowledgement, gone before it could be classified. "What's below this city?" he asked, his focus returning to the skyline. Charlie blinked at the pivot. Below other rings. More layers, why? And above? She hesitated one beat too long. Heaven, silence. And between the two, he continued, gaze still on the skyline. There is an arrangement. It was not a question. It did not need to be. Charlie opened her mouth and found nothing immediately available. Vaggie's head turned a sharp, precise motion toward Charlie. A warning. Don't. The pause stretched long enough to answer him anyway. Then from somewhere inside the hotel, drifting up through floors and walls, and the open frame of the access door, came a sound that did not belong to the building. A static crackle. A frequency that was not electrical. So much as theatrical old broadcast warmth wrapped around something that had no warmth in it at all. Beneath it, the first suggestion of a melody, or possibly just the shape of one. Vegeta's attention shifted, not toward the sound, toward where it was coming from. Vaggie repositioned her grip without looking down at her hands. Charlie looked between the door, the spear, and the man standing at the edge of their roof. And her expression settled into the look of someone who has just realized the night is going to be significantly longer than originally scheduled. That, she chose her words with care, would be a laster. He came through the door the way most people came through doors, upright, unhurried. One hand resting lightly on the frame as he passed through it. But the door seemed to behave differently for him than it did for other people. It opened at exactly the right moment. The light from the hallway fell across him at an angle that would have required deliberate staging anywhere else. His expression was already in place, wide and fixed in the way of something that had been practiced into a reflex, and his eyes held the bright, attentive cast of a man who has just sat down to watch his favorite program. "Salutations," Alastair announced, stepping onto the roof with the unhurried confidence of someone arriving precisely on time to an event he had personally scheduled. His gaze swept the scene Charlie near the railing, Vaggie between her and the stranger himself standing at the roof's edge with his back still mostly to the door, and the set of his mouth did not change. If anything, it sharpened at the corners. My. What a find. Charlie's expression cycled through relief, caution, and resignation in about 3 seconds. "Alastair, hi. His name is Vegeta. He landed on the roof." "Landed?" Alastair repeated, savoring the word. "How delightfully unconventional." He clasped his hands behind his back head, tilting at a slight angle the antenna on his head, swaying with the air of independent curiosity. "I do love an unconventional entrance. Sets the tone, doesn't it?" Vaggie had not lowered her spear. She had also not pointed it at Alastair, which was a small concession to the fact that doing so would require her to divide her attention in a way she was not prepared to. She stood between all three of them technically, and her face communicated that she was fully aware of how suboptimal her current position was. Alastair. The single word carried more syllables of warning than its 3 letters should have allowed. "Vaggie, dear." The look on his face remained unmoved. "Always so vigilant. It's one of your better qualities." Vegeta had turned around by now. Not quickly. There had been nothing in Alastair's arrival that required urgency. But with a deliberate rotation of someone choosing to face a new variable. He looked at Alastair the way he had looked at the city. The way he had looked at Charlie and Vaggie, a brief, thorough inventory that did not linger on anything longer than necessary and arrived at its conclusions without broadcasting them. Alastair looked back. His expression held its shape. But something behind it recalibrated a nearly invisible adjustment, the kind a skilled performer makes when the audience turns out to be larger or more complex than anticipated. "And you?" Alastair began, his voice carrying the warmth of a broadcaster who has found his subject are not from here. "No, not from anywhere nearby, I'd wager." Alastair began to move not toward Vegeta, but in a slow arc that traced the edge of the roof access structure, the kind of movement that maintained distance while suggesting ease. "I've encountered a considerable variety of guests in my time, and I find I cannot place you in any category I currently have available. That is, I should tell you, extremely rare. I have quite a lot of categories." "I'm not interested in your categories." "Of course not. You're not the sort." No offense in his tone, if anything more pleased. The interesting ones never are. Charlie had been watching this exchange the way someone watches a lit match hold itself very close to something flammable, not moving, barely breathing, hoping that proximity would not translate into ignition. She cleared her throat. "So, we were just getting to know each other. Vegeta Alastair helps keep the hotel running. He's complicated, but the place is still standing largely because of that arrangement." "A delightful way to put it," Alastair agreed affably. He doesn't actually care about the redemption part. Vaggie cut in with the flatness of someone who stopped softening that truth a long time ago. "Vaggie." Charlie's voice carried a note of pained diplomacy. "She's not wrong." Alastair's tone held every appearance of finding this charming. "I care about the story, my dear. Fortunately, redemption makes for exceptional storytelling. All that struggle, all that failure, terrific material." He paused, and his delivery shifted just slightly the way a television host moves between segments. "Speaking of which, have you told our guest about the schedule?" The temperature of Charlie's expression dropped about 4 degrees. A laster? What schedule? Not a question. A demand for information delivered in the register of someone who has already decided the answer will be unacceptable. Vagji's jaw tightened. It's not relevant right now. On the contrary, Alastair replied, strolling to the railing and leaning against it with an ease that suggested he found ledges and high places entirely natural. It seems extraordinarily relevant to our current situation. Our guest has arrived at quite an interesting moment. He turned to look out over the city with an air of pleasant nostalgia. Every year, previously every year, heaven has recently shown an inclination to accelerate the pace the angels come down. Alastair. Charlie's voice was flat now, the warmth compressed out of it. He continued as though she had not spoken. They come through in force. Waves of soldiers, fully armed, working through the city until the population is sufficiently reduced. He said this with the light conversational effect of someone describing a seasonal market like a holiday if your holiday involved screaming. The residents here have very little recourse. It's quite the production, really. I've always appreciated the logistical commitment, even if the artistry leaves much to be desired. Silence. Then Vegeta spoke. They come on a schedule. Reliably so, Alastair confirmed. Predictable timing, predictable entry points. The gates don't open at random, they anchor to fixed positions. Specific locations that hold the passage open the same ones every time. Very methodical. Heaven does love its methods. Vagji's head turned toward Alastair with the sharp precision of someone recognizing an action for exactly what it is. Why are you telling him that? Alastair spread his hands in a gesture of innocent delight. He asked. He didn't ask about the anchor points. Didn't he? I may have gotten ahead of myself. His expression returned to its full breadth unbothered. Force of habit. I do tend to provide context. Vegeta had gone still. Not the ordinary stillness of someone who has stopped moving, but the focused stillness of someone processing new information at full attention, the way a fighter quiets when a pattern in the opponent's movement suddenly becomes legible. Around him, the air shifted. It was not dramatic. No flash, no obvious display. But the lobby radio 2 floors below stuttered a burst of static, brief and sharp like a signal. Crowded out by something broadcasting on a frequency it had no business being on. The lights along the hotel's exterior flickered once, and the air on the rooftop changed in a way that had nothing to do with wind. The pressure dropped a fraction enough that breathing required a conscious effort, enough that Charlie's hand went to her sternum without her noticing she had moved it. Alastair's eyes moved to Vegeta with the look of a man who has just confirmed a hypothesis he found very satisfying. They come through fixed points, Vegeta stated. The same positions, every time. Every time, Alastair confirmed with every appearance of ease. Charlie pressed her other hand against the railing. Okay, Heaven moved the schedule up. They're coming sooner than before. And I know it seems like there's nothing anyone can. They come down and kill people. A flat delivery stripped of everything except the fact. Regularly. And this is the arrangement you mentioned. Charlie did not answer immediately. The flatness of those words, stripped of the careful language she had spent years building around this fact, landed differently spoken aloud by someone with no investment in making it easier to hear. It's been going on a long time. She pressed on. The sinners here are just trying to survive it. That's the whole point of the hotel. If we can show heaven that people deserve a chance, they kill them anyway, Vagji said quietly. Not an accusation. Just true. And she was the one person in this group who did not see the point in not saying so. Even now, even with the hotel, they still come. The silence after that had a different weight from the ones before it. Vegeta looked at Charlie, at Vaggie. Back at the city below, the red-soaked sprawl of it, the clubs grinding the signs, burning the population, moving through its routines with the momentum of things that cannot afford to stop. That's not law. His voice had not risen. It did not need to. That's cowardice with a calendar. Charlie blinked. Vaggie's posture shifted, not toward trust, nowhere near that, but toward the fractional recognition of someone who has just heard a true thing, said without flinching. Alastair looked delighted in the precise way of someone whose pieces have moved exactly as he arranged them. He said nothing. He did not need to. I want to know who runs it. He was looking at Alastair now. Not the soldiers, the arrangement itself, the authority behind it. Alastair tilted his head, an antenna swaying. Hell has a king, he began, and heaven has its own hierarchy. A pause calibrated the kind a good broadcaster uses to let a line land before moving on. Both of them have been comfortable with this arrangement for quite a long time. Vegeta's face had not changed since he landed. The same flat assessing quality throughout every exchange, and the stillness of it was becoming with each passing minute less like disinterest and more like the surface of something that ran very deep and very cold. Then I'll find them. Both of them. Of course you will, Alastair returned warmly. I do hope you'll let me watch. From the far edge of the sky, so distant it might have been imagined, a thin line, a pale light, appeared along the horizon. Not sunrise. The Pride Ring had no sunrise. This was colder, more surgical, the kind of illumination that comes not from warmth, but from intent. It lasted 3 seconds. Then it was gone. Charlie saw it. Her face went very still. Vaggie saw it too. Her grip on the spears shifted, not a fighting adjustment, but the involuntary tightening of someone who has felt this particular chill before and knows precisely what follows it. How long? He had seen it as well. Charlie swallowed. We don't know exactly. Sooner than it should be. He turned back to the city, the club still grinding the signs, still burning the population below, still moving through its routines with the determined momentum of things that do not have the luxury of stopping, and something in his jaw set. Not anger. Not yet. Something older than anger, seated deeper. Then there isn't much time to find what I'm looking for. The pale light had lasted 3 seconds. The conversation had ended, had not resumed. Charlie stood at the rooftop railing with her hands wrapped around the metal and her eyes fixed on the horizon where the light had been. It was gone now. The sky was back to its usual rust and red, the city below grinding through its routines, the signs cycling, the clubs leaking their pressure into the street. From the outside, nothing had changed. That was the problem. Extermination always looked like nothing had changed until the day it arrived, and everything had. It's moving up. Vaggie was not looking at the horizon. She was watching Vegeta, which had become, in the last 10 minutes, the task that required the most attention. We knew that already. We have to start. I know what we have to start. Charlie cut in quieter than usual. She finally turned away from the railing. I know. The shelter list, the route maps, getting everyone who's made progress at the hotels somewhere defensible. She exhaled. I thought we'd have more time. We always think that. A silence. The kind that comes when someone says a true thing and there's no useful response to it. Across the roof, Vegeta had not moved from his position at the edge. He had been still since the light appeared, and he had remained still after it faded, with the patience of someone who has learned to let information settle before acting on it. He was not waiting to be included in the conversation. He was already past it, already somewhere further along the chain of consequence, turning over what he had been told and measuring it against what it meant. The anchor points, the fixed positions, the same gates every time. He filed the detail and let it sit. It was Vegeta who noticed at first the change in the air that had nothing to do with wind or temperature and everything to do with pressure. The hairs along her arms rose. Old instinct, older than most of her memories, the specific alarm that had been trained into her body during years she was still not entirely at peace with. She turned toward the access door. Nothing there. She turned toward the street below. Nothing obvious. Then she looked straight up. The sky above the hotel had shifted. Not in color, the rust red held, but the weight of it changed to compression that had nothing to do with weather. Something above the cloud layer was descending with the unhurried certainty of authority that does not expect resistance. A column of golden light opened over the hotel. Not the cold surgical pale of what they'd seen at the horizon. This was warmer, more theatrical, the kind of illumination that understood it was being watched and had dressed accordingly. It lasted about 4 seconds, long enough to be noticed by a significant portion of the street below. And then it folded itself closed, and Lucifer Morningstar stepped onto the roof of the Hazbin Hotel as though he owned it. Which technically he did. He was dressed impeccably, and he moved with the loose ease of a man who has never had to hurry because the world consistently arranged itself to wait for him. His gaze crossed the rooftop in one sweep, Charlie Vegeta Laster in the doorway behind them, and then the figure at the roof's edge who had not turned around, and his expression held the pleasant neutrality of someone cataloging a situation before deciding how to feel about it. Charlie. The word carried several things at once. Affection, mild exasperation, and the resignation of a parent who has arrived at a commotion and is not yet sure whose fault it is. I felt a landing on my city. Charlie straightened. Dad, hi. It's being handled. Is it? He looked at Vegeta's back. That's what you'd call it? From the doorway, Alistair's face did a brief controlled thing, the corners of his perpetual performance tightening for exactly half a second before resettling. It was the kind of adjustment that required knowing what to look for. Vegeta was looking for it. She caught it, filed it, and kept quiet. Vegeta turned around. The two of them regarded each other across the width of the rooftop. Lucifer with the composed attention of a ruler examining a variable that has appeared in his domain without permission. Vegeta with the same inventory expression he applied to everything thorough, arriving at its conclusion without any visible effort. You felt a landing, Vegeta repeated. His tone was not impressed. It was not hostile. It was the voice of a man deciding whether the person in front of him is relevant to anything he cares about. You're the one who runs this. This ring, this city, this entire side of the cosmic ledger, if we're being thorough. Lucifer tilted his head slightly. And you're the one who dropped out of a dimensional fault onto my hotel roof, apparently. So we're both making an impression. Dad, Charlie tried moving a half step forward. Maybe we can just... I'm not angry, sweetheart. Lucifer's tone was mild. I'm curious. He kept his gaze on Vegeta. You're not a sinner. You don't carry the resonance of a fallen soul. You're not an angel, I'd know that, within 10 feet. A pause. So what exactly are you? A problem for your system, Vegeta replied, if that's what you're asking. Lucifer studied him for a moment. Then, with the deliberate ease of a man who has made a decision, he took 2 steps forward and let the air around him change. It was not subtle. That was the point. The golden light that had announced his arrival pooled around his feet again, and the pressure of it spread outward across the roof, not violently, not as an attack, but as a demonstration. The unmistakable weight of a presence, vast and old, and accustomed to being the dominant force in any space it occupied. Authority made physical expecting, through sheer accumulated age, to be felt. Charlie's breath caught. Vaggie planted her feet. Even Alastor in the doorway shifted his grip on his cane by a fraction. Vegeta stood exactly where he was. Not bracing, not compensating, not performing indifference the way someone does when they are working to maintain it. He simply stood there, unchanged, and Lucifer's demonstration moved around him the way current moves around an anchor, present acknowledged and entirely without effect. The gap that followed had an unusual weight to it. Lucifer let the display fade. His bearing had not shifted, but something behind it had recalibrated a more significant adjustment than the one Alastor had made. He was a being who had across the full stretch of his existence rarely encountered anything he could not at minimum move. The update registered instantly. His reaction to it was slower, turning it over, fitting it into a framework that had not previously included this category. He said finally. Showmanship, Vegeta answered. Not strength. Lucifer's chin lifted by half an inch. That was all. But it was the half inch of a man who has just had a foundational assumption questioned and is deciding very quickly how to respond. It's held together for longer than most civilizations have existed, he replied with the mild precision of someone correcting a factual error. It held hell in a cage, Vegeta returned. And you convinced yourself the cage was a kingdom. Charlie made a short sound. Vaggie's hand moved to her arm, not restraining. Just present, just there, the touch that said, I'm next to you. Lucifer looked at Charlie, then back at Vegeta. When he spoke again, his voice had not risen. It had done the opposite, gone quieter, the way very still water is always deeper than water with surface noise. My daughter runs an interesting experiment here, Lucifer continued. I've allowed it because I believe in letting people find their own walls. Now he took one step to the side, a slow movement, the kind that establishes territory without claiming to. But this is still my kingdom. The walls, the city, the ring, the ledger, all of it. What happens here happens with my awareness and under my authority. That includes whatever you are planning. I'm not planning anything for your benefit, Vegeta replied. Or under your authority? No, Lucifer agreed calmly. You're not. That's the interesting part. He glanced at Alastor, a knowing look, the kind shared between two entities who have been playing long games long enough to recognize when a new piece has been introduced to the board. Alastor returned nothing, which was itself a form of response. Heaven still believes it holds the leash on this situation. It runs its schedule, takes its count, and goes home satisfied. I've coexisted with that reality for a very long time. And you call that ruling? Vegeta's voice carried no inflection, no question, just the weight of a verdict. The words landed the way flat stones land on still water. No explosion, just the spreading disturbance of a thing that cannot be taken back. Lucifer's expression held. He was good at this. He had been doing it for eons, the precise management of a face and a bearing that showed nothing it did not choose to show. But the silence he held for the next 3 seconds was slightly longer than it needed to be. I call it surviving, he answered at last, which in this arrangement is not as simple as it sounds. When heaven moves its schedule, I hear it within the hour. When it opens a gate, I know the position before the first soldier lands. That is not nothing. A pause harder edged than the ones before it. It is also not enough. I am aware of the difference. Surviving is not the same as living, Vegeta replied. And enduring an insult is not the same as accepting it. Another beat. Charlie looked between the two of them, reading the room the way she had always read rooms, for the current underneath the words for the moment, at which things could still be steered toward somewhere other than wreckage. She found the opening and stepped into it. "What Vegeta means," she began. "I mean exactly what I said. No heat in it. Just the flat certainty of someone who does not soften their words for the sake of the room. Your city is killed on a schedule. You know the schedule. You know the gates. You know the fixed points they open from." He held Lucifer's gaze. "And you've done nothing about any of it." Lucifer looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Charlie, at his daughter standing with her hand half extended toward a man she had met an hour ago, still trying to keep the peace between a Saiyan and the King of Hell on a hotel rooftop. His face did something complicated and controlled and very brief. "Charlie, quieter now. You always did find the most extraordinary strays. Dad, I'm not insulting him." A pause. "Or you." He turned back to Vegeta. "I'll be watching what you do here, very carefully." The weight of the words was not a threat, exactly more the statement of a man laying down the terms of an observation. "This is still my kingdom. Try not to break what doesn't need breaking before we know if it can be replaced." Vegeta said nothing. He held Lucifer's gaze and let the silence stand as its own answer. It was enough. Lucifer understood the language of silence, had been speaking it for longer than most things had existed. He turned unhurried back toward the center of the roof. The column of light opened again, warmer this time, less declarative. He stepped into it with the composure of a man who has always known how to make an exit. "One more thing," Vegeta called after him. Lucifer paused inside the light, did not turn around. "Heaven runs its schedule because you let it," Vegeta continued. "Whatever you tell yourself about survival. The arrangement exists because no one with enough power has decided to end it." A beat. "That's changing." The column of light folded shut. The rooftop was quiet. Below, the city had not changed its rhythm. The clubs grinding the signs, burning the permanent machinery of Pentagram City, continuing without acknowledgement of what had just transpired on one of its higher elevations. Charlie let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like several minutes. "That..." Vaggie broke in with the precision of someone who has been waiting for it to be over. "Went better than it could have." "It went terribly," Charlie answered, though her voice was more weary than alarmed. "He didn't try to throw anyone off the roof. That's a very low bar. It's the bar we're working with." Vegeta had turned back to the skyline. His attention had moved on from Lucifer, filed the encounter with the brisk efficiency of a mind already 3 steps further along. The King of Hell had told him a great deal, not in words, but in the precise shape of what he had not done. A ruler who knew the schedule, knew the gates, knew the fixed positions, and had found across centuries a reason not to use that knowledge. That was information. Behind them, from inside the hotel, a different sound drifted up. Not the static warmth of a Laster's frequency, but audio clipped and overbright, a broadcast running on too many channels at once. A voice, smooth, performative, carrying the practiced ease of a signal, engineered for maximum reach. And our sources are confirming that the disturbance at the Hazbin Hotel earlier tonight was not, as previously rumored, a new demonic entity, but rather something considerably more interesting. Stay tuned. Vaggie and Charlie both turned toward the sound at the same moment. Alastair, still in the doorway, let his expression resume its full operational width. "Ah," pleasantly. "It seems Vox has found his subject." The broadcast went live at what passed for midnight in Pentagram City, which meant approximately 40% of the population was awake, chemically incapable of sleep, or professionally obligated to be watching something. Vox had excellent instincts about timing. His feed cut through most of Pride Ring simultaneously. The massive displays bolted to casino facades, the monitors mounted above bars on the lower blocks. The personal devices of anyone subscribed to his network, which after 30 years of aggressive expansion meant most of the city. The opening sequence was tight 3 seconds of static to clarity, the Vox Tech logo, and then his face filling every display at once, with the practiced ease of someone who has spent decades learning that the most effective way to own a room is to become the room's face. Good evening, Pentagram City. The voice was warm, calibrated, and about 40% more friendly than anything that lived behind it. Breaking news from the Pride Ring. Sources close to the Hazbin Hotel. And we have multiple sources tonight, very credible, very scared, are confirming that the disturbance reported earlier this evening is not, as some have suggested, a standard dimensional anomaly. A pause. Exactly as long as a pause needed to be to communicate that what followed was significant. What we're looking at, according to our information, is the possible arrival of an outside entity. Unknown origin, unknown allegiance, possibly connected to current management at a certain redemption-focused establishment on the East Block. The word management landed with the particular weight Vox gave it. When he wanted an audience to draw conclusions, he preferred not to state directly. Now, we're not saying Charlie Morningstar brought something dangerous into Pentagram City. Another pause. We're saying the timing is interesting. We're saying the questions deserve answers. And we're saying stay with us because this story is only getting started. The banner along the bottom of every display refreshed Hazbin Hotel incident developing. Sources confirm threat level unknown. Stay tuned. 3 floors up and 4 blocks east. Charlie stood in the hotel lobby and watched this happen on the television above the bar. Her face did several things in sequence. The first was recognition. The second was the specific frustration of someone watching a lie being assembled in real time from pieces of truth. The third was the expression of a person realizing that the lie is already moving faster than any correction could. He doesn't have sources, she said. There are no sources. Nobody in this building talked to. He doesn't need sources. Vaggie was not watching the television. She was watching the window tracking the street below, where a cluster of sinners had stopped to look up at the broadcast displays and were now visibly talking among themselves. He has the transmission. That's the source. On the feed, Vox had transitioned smoothly into an interview segment. The interviewee was a sinner. Charlie had never seen introduced only as a resident of the Pride Ring area who wishes to remain anonymous for safety reasons. I just feel like, the anonymous resident offered in the careful tone of someone who has been coached. We deserve to know what's in our neighborhood. You know, we already got extermination to worry about, and now there's, I don't even know what it is. An outsider, something that doesn't belong here. Absolutely valid concern. Vox agreed warmly, his face returning to full screen. Absolutely valid. And we are committed to getting you those answers. The banner refreshed again. Vox News exclusive is Hazbin Hotel, a threat to your safety. Charlie turned away from the television. I should go out there, she said. I should explain that. If you walk out that door right now, Vaggie replied, still watching the window. You will be on camera in under 30 seconds. Whatever you say will be cut into whatever he needs it to be. She finally looked at Charlie. Her expression was not unsympathetic. It was also not flexible. You cannot out-talk his signal. He controls the edit. The lobby was quiet for a moment. Angel Dust had stopped pretending to organize bottles behind the bar and was openly listening. Husk had not moved, but his ears were angled forward. "So what do we do?" Charlie asked. "We do what we were already doing," Vaggie answered. "Shelter routes, the list. The people who need to be somewhere safe before extermination hits, that's the actual problem, not the feed." On the television, Vox had moved to a panel discussion. 3 commentators Charlie had also never seen were debating whether the Hazbin entity represented a new form of dimensional breach, a calculated provocation by Hell's current political fringe, or delivered with theatrical gravity, a sign of something much larger destabilizing the cosmic order as we know it. "This is insane," Charlie said, in the tone of someone who knows they are right, but understands that being right is not the same as being heard. "This is Tuesday," Angel Dust offered from behind the bar. Vegeta had been on the roof. He had remained there after Lucifer's departure, partly because the roof offered the clearest sightline across Pentagram City, and partly because the hotel's interior was loud in a way that made sustained thought difficult. He was not bothered by noise. As a rule, he had fought in conditions that made Pentagram City sound like a library. But this particular noise was purposeful, directed, and served a function he found immediately recognizable: propaganda. He had encountered it in various forms across various worlds. The delivery method changed: stone tablets, radio waves, projection screens the size of buildings, but the structure was always the same. Identify a fear. Attach the fear to a target. Repeat until the fear and the target are indistinguishable. Then sell both. On the display visible from the roof, the massive panel on the casino facade across the street. Vox's face smiled its engineered smile and laid out the architecture of the next 12 hours with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. The banner at the bottom refreshed every 90 seconds. Entity at Hazbin Hotel, what we know. Then sources. Unprecedented power levels. Then Charlie Morningstar, responsible or reckless. Below on the street, the crowd density was increasing. Not organized, just the gathering of people drawn toward the light, of a large display instinct, without agenda, moths, without the self-awareness to know they were circling. Vegeta watched for approximately 45 seconds. Then, he came down from the roof. He did not go to the lobby first. He went out through the hotel's side entrance, onto the narrow street that ran along the building's east face, and then directly toward the source of the broadcast. The Vox Tech relay station for the Pride Ring Central District occupied the upper 2 floors of a building 4 blocks north. A structure that was otherwise a nightclub on its lower levels, because every building in Pentagram City was something else on its lower levels. The relay station's presence was indicated by the density of antenna arrays on the roof, and by the fact that the screens on the surrounding buildings were noticeably brighter and higher resolution than those further out. He did not need anyone to point him toward it. He had identified it from the roof by the signal pattern. Not technically, not through any specialized reading, but by triangulation and instinct, the same process a fighter uses to locate the origin point of a sound in a chaotic room. The street crowd thinned as he walked. Not dramatically, he was not performing anything, had not released a single deliberate pulse. But the people nearest his path developed one by one an unspecific awareness that they would rather be somewhere else. They moved. The gap widened. He walked through it without acknowledgement. A group of 4 sinners outside the nightclub's entrance, the kind who occupied doorways as a profession, clocked him from half a block away. They watched him approach. 2 of them took a step backward before they had consciously processed why. The other 2 held position for another 3 seconds, then found reasons to look at other things. Vegeta walked through the door. The nightclub occupied the lower floors in full operational mode, which meant it was dark, loud, and packed with the kind of activity that preferred not to be examined. None of this was relevant. He moved through it at the same pace he had moved through the street, not rushing, not aggressive, but with the quality of forward momentum that does not leave room for the question of whether to stop. The stairwell to the upper floors was at the back. He took it. The relay station was exactly what he had expected. A room dense with equipment banks of monitors cycling through feeds. 2 technicians who looked up from their consoles as he walked in. One of them registered the situation correctly within 2 seconds. The other took 3. Both of them went pale, or whatever the hell equivalent of pale was, and the one closer to the door developed a noticeable problem with his breathing before Vegeta had crossed half the room. The monitors around him showed Vox's transmission from 6 different angles. On one of them, Vox was mid-sentence delivering what appeared to be a live editorial. And I think what the residents of Pentagram City need to understand is that this is not about fear. This is about accountability. When an unknown entity enters our community and those responsible for that entry refuse to be transparent. Vegeta looked at the equipment, then at the 2 technicians who had pressed themselves against the far wall. "Out," he said. They went. He turned back to the consoles. He did not examine them in detail. He had no interest in understanding how they worked. He was interested only in the fact that they were the mechanism by which a specific kind of noise was being manufactured and distributed across a city that had enough actual problems without someone adding engineered panic to the inventory. He raised one hand. The pulse was small, controlled, a fraction of what he was capable of, the equivalent by his own internal measure of a man clearing his throat in a loud room. It was not targeted at any specific component. It did not need to be. The equipment in the room operated on electrical systems, and electrical systems had a tolerance threshold, and the threshold was considerably below what had just passed through the room. Every monitor went dark simultaneously. The antenna arrays on the roof above flickered once emitted a sound that was not quite an electrical pop, but in the same family, and ceased transmitting. Across the city's central district, every display carrying Vox's feed cut to static in the same instant. The timing was precise enough that it looked deliberate, which it was, though not in the technical sense. The mid-sentence cut happened to catch Vox with his mouth open mid-word. Several thousand viewers in Pride Ring watched the king of media hell get interrupted by nothing mid-thought in a way he very clearly had not scheduled. The dead air that followed the absence of Vox's voice from the airwaves lasted approximately 8 seconds before backup systems began cycling. 8 seconds is not a long time. In transmission terms, 8 seconds of silence is an eternity. It is the kind of gap that gets discussed afterward, because it represents a moment when the machinery that makes a city feel like it's being narrated simply stopped and nobody had an explanation ready. Vegeta walked back down the stairs. Soon, in the lobby of the Hazbin hotel, the television above the bar went to static. Charlie blinked at it. Husk looked at the television, then at the door, then back at the television. "Huh," Angel Dust offered from behind the bar. 3 minutes later, the backup feed came online, carrying a different program, a cooking show of all things, apparently the only content in the Vox Tech archive that had loaded without error. Vox's voice did not return to the airwaves for the rest of the night. And far above the city, at the edge of the rust-colored sky, the thin, pale line was still there, patient, unhurried, keeping its own schedule regardless of who controlled the airwaves below. In the Vox Tech production suite 12 blocks away from the relay station, Vox stood in front of a wall of now dark monitors with the expression of a man who has been publicly humiliated in front of an audience of approximately 500,000 people and is in the early stages of deciding what to do about it. His eye, the television screen that served as his face, had gone a color that was not in his normal palette. The production staff around him had arranged themselves at the maximum possible distance from his immediate vicinity without technically leaving the room. "Get me the relay logs." His voice had shed the on-air warmth entirely. What was underneath was quieter and considerably less friendly. "Get me the footage. Get me anything from the street outside that building." A pause. "And somebody tell me exactly what we're dealing with, because I want to know the shape of this before I decide how to bury it." Nobody in the room pointed out that the relay logs were by definition empty. The logs required the relay to be functioning. Outside, the city was quieter than it had been an hour ago, not silent. Pentagram City did not do silent, but the specific noise of Vox's feed was absent, and its absence had left a gap in the ambient noise that residents were in various ways noticing. Some of them were unsettled. Some of them were quietly pleased in the relief of someone who has stopped consciously registering a loud sound and only realizes it when the sound stops. In a suite of offices high above the lower city, in buildings that did not advertise their occupants, other people were noticing the gap as well. They were noticing it and drawing conclusions, and the conclusions they were drawing were not the ones Vox would have chosen for them. The overlords of hell had been watching since Lucifer arrived on that hotel roof. They had been watching carefully. What had just happened to Vox Tech's signal was not to them a technical malfunction. It was a data point. The sky changed at 3 in the morning. Not gradually. There was no slow build, no atmospheric warning that accumulated over hours. The shift happened the way a switch flips one state then another, with only the briefest interval between them that could be called transition. The rust-red overhead went cold. The color did not drain so much as curdle the warmth, replaced by something surgical and pale, the kind of light that does not illuminate so much as expose. Along the horizon, the thin line that had been visible since the first night, since the pale warning at the edge of the sky, had thickened into something that could no longer be mistaken for atmospheric distortion. Below it, Pentagram City moved. Not in panic, that was the thing that caught the attention of anyone watching from above. The movement had the quality of a practiced evacuation. Doors closed, shutters dropped. The clubs on the lower blocks, which never closed, closed. Street vendors who had been operating since the previous evening folded their setups with the brisk efficiency of people who had rehearsed this sequence many times. Small groups converged on specific buildings, shelter points, their locations known not from signage, but from communal memory passed down through cycles of loss. Children, the rare few who existed even in this place, were moved first quickly without drama. They had done this before. They would do it again. The only question, the same question every cycle, was how many of them would still be here when it ended. In the Hazbin hotel, Charlie had not slept. She had been working since the pale line appeared running through the shelter list with the focused urgency of someone who has converted panic into function. The map she had been building for months, updated after every extermination. Every loss, every gap in coverage she had found too late, was spread across the lobby floor. She moved between it and the door, coordinating with the sinners who had been coming through since midnight, people who trusted the hotel as a point of refuge. People who had nowhere else to go. People who had simply followed someone else and hoped the destination was better than the street. The Merlot building is at capacity, she called toward Vaggie, who was near the entrance, managing the flow. Route the next group toward the warehouse on 5th. Already did. Vaggie was tracking 3 things at once, with the precise attention economy of someone trained for this kind of triage. She had her spear. She had a mental map of every entry point within 2 blocks. She had not stopped moving in 40 minutes. The exorcists usually hit the southeast corridor first. That's where the density is highest. How do you... Charlie stopped herself. This was not the moment. Fifth, warehouse, then the parking structure on Ash, in that order. Got it. The hotel filled and emptied in waves, each group passing through, quickly long enough to receive the route information, not long enough to become a bottleneck. Charlie stayed at the center of it, keeping track, redirecting her voice steady, even when the sound from outside shifted. Because at some point in those 40 minutes, a new sound had joined the city's ambient noise. High and thin, more sensation than audio, like a frequency that targeted the inner ear rather than the eardrum. Those who had been through this before recognized it immediately. Those who hadn't learned it in the next 3 seconds. The gates were opening, and Vegeta heard the frequency change from the roof. He had been up there since the sky shifted, watching the cold light organize itself into intent. When the sound arrived, he placed it without effort, the resonance of a dimensional threshold, being forced the distinct register of a barrier between states of existence being held artificially open. He had heard it in various forms before on various worlds that had various names for the thing that made it. What interested him was not the sound itself, but what came with it, the energy. It came through the opening in streams, channeled rather than broadcast, running along invisible lines from fixed points in the sky down to fixed points in the ground. Not diffuse, not spreading, targeted. Current through a wire rather than water, flooding a room, structured, directed, anchored at both ends. He tracked the anchor positions the way he tracked the structural logic of an opponent's stance, not consciously analyzing, just registering where the energy entered, where it pooled, where it held. The geometry was consistent. No variation, no adaptation, no indication the system had ever been designed to change. Predictable, he noted, and let the information settle into the same place where he kept everything else he intended to use later. Then, the first wave of exorcists came through. Dunk. They dropped in columns, precise, fast, arriving in the kind of formation that communicated this was not improvised. Hundreds of them, white-armored weapons, already drawn, spreading through the streets below, with the systematic efficiency of something that had been optimized across many iterations. They moved through the city as though the city had no population in it that mattered, because for the purposes of what they had been sent to do, it did not. Charlie from the hotel doorway watched the first column hit the southeast corridor and felt her chest compress the way it always did at this point, the moment where the scale of it landed, regardless of how many times she had tried to prepare for it. Last group through. Vaggie from behind her. Close the door. There are still... Close the door, Charlie. Not unkind. Absolute. We cannot help anyone if this building is breached. Close it. Charlie closed it. She pressed her back against the door for 1 second, 2, 3, long enough to make the transition from the part of the response where she was managing movement to the part where she had to manage what came next. Then she turned back to the lobby. Everyone on the lower level, away from the windows. Now. 10. Adam came through last. This was deliberate. The exorcists had been sent ahead to manage volume. Adam arrived when the corridors had been sufficiently cleared to give him room to make the kind of entrance he preferred. He landed on the main street 3 blocks from the hotel with the casual authority of a man who has never arrived anywhere without it going the way he expected. He was large, armored in the bone white of Heaven's Force's guitar axe resting across one shoulder, radiating the unmistakable confidence of someone who has been told repeatedly by the architecture of the universe itself that his presence is justified and his actions sanctioned. He looked at the city around him, the closed shutters, the empty streets, the distant sounds of his exorcists working through the southeast, and smiled with the satisfaction of a man arriving at a task he finds personally gratifying. Hell of a turnout, Adam announced to no one in particular. Oh, wait. He tilted his head, amused with himself. Yeah, actually, hell of a turnout. Then he noticed the figure on the roof of the Hazbin hotel. Adam looked up. Vegeta looked down. Huh. Adam's smile did not diminish. It adapted the smile of someone who has found an unexpected problem and is already confident it is not actually a problem. What are you supposed to be? Vegeta did not answer. He stepped off the roof. He did not fall. He descended, which is a different thing. Controlled unhurried landing in the street 3 meters from Adam with the quiet finality of something that has decided on its position. He straightened. He looked at Adam with the same assessment he had applied to everyone in this city and reached his conclusions at the usual speed. You lead this. Flat. Not a question. Top of the org chart, Adam confirmed. And you're in my workspace, so call them back. Adam blinked. The request delivered without heat, without performance, without any of the setup Adam's experience told him, should precede a challenge landed in a register he did not entirely have a category for. He had been threatened before. He had been challenged before. He had been insulted in ways that required creativity, but he had not often been given a flat administrative instruction as the opening move. His smile sharpened. Oh, I like this. I really like this. He swung the guitar axe off his shoulder, rotating it once with the practiced ease of someone who does this for the camera as much as for function. You've got about 4 seconds of my attention before this stops being interesting and starts being exercise. So what are you, where'd you come from, and do you have any idea what you just stepped into? Your operation ends here, Vegeta answered. That's all you need. Adam laughed. It was a genuine laugh, the laugh of someone who has just been handed a gift. Oh man, oh this is great. I haven't had a warm-up this fun in... He moved. It was fast. Adam was fast enough that in any context involving the population of Hell, fast enough that in any encounter with anyone or anything that belonged to this part of the cosmic order, fast would have been the correct assessment. Vegeta was not part of this part of the cosmic order. He caught Adam's strike without looking at it, not blocked, not deflected. Simply interrupted, one hand closing around the weapon's shaft at the point of its maximum velocity, and stopping it with the finality of a wall. The force of Adam's swing, considerable by any local measure, transferred into Vegeta's grip and went nowhere. Adam's forward momentum died. His expression cycled through surprise recalibration and the beginning of something that might eventually become concern. Your weapons? Vegeta said quietly. Don't factor in. He released the guitar axe and took 1 step back. Then he raised his right-hand palm forward and let a fraction of what he carried gather there. Not a full release, not even close. But enough pouring a cup of water from an ocean is still drawing from the ocean. The energy that left his hand was Gallic purple and the width of a man's torso. It covered the distance to Adam in no measurable time and hit him with enough force to put him through the front facade of the building directly behind him, through the rear wall of that building, and into the street on the other side. The impact shook 3 city blocks. Dust, debris, a stillness absolute to aftermath, the kind that follows an event large enough to override every other sound in the vicinity for a moment before the city's ambient noise rushes back in. Across the street, 3 exorcists who had been working the adjacent block had turned at the impact. They stood perfectly motionless now, staring at the hole in the building. Adam was in that hole, still alive. Vegeta had not aimed to kill, had not needed to, had calibrated this with the precision of someone who knows the difference between a demonstration and an execution and chooses deliberately which to deliver. But Adam was not at this moment in any condition to continue his agenda. The guitar axe lay in the street between them. Vegeta walked past it without looking down. "The gates," he said loud enough to carry without effort. "Close them." He was not talking to Adam. He was talking to the exorcists, to the formation visible at the end of the block, to the forces that had spread through the southeast corridor and were now very noticeably not moving. One of them, near the far junction, raised a hand to their armor. touched a point at the collar, a communication interface, a relay back up the chain. Their halos flickered once. Whatever signal traveled through that chain was brief. From this point, Vegeta continued at the same volume. Your schedule doesn't hold. Adam from the rubble made a sound. Ragged, not coherent. You're, Adam started. Alive because I allowed it. Vegeta finished. The next one who comes through those gates won't be making that choice again. He turned away from Adam completely. The deliberate insult of a fighter who has determined the target is beneath continued attention and looked back at the sky. The gates were still open. The energy streams were still running along their anchor lines, the marked positions, holding the passage steady. He traced them one more time, unhurried, committing the positions to the same internal record he maintained for anything he intended to revisit. 4 points. Consistent geometry. No deviation from the pattern Alastor had described, and he had confirmed. He noted them and let the noting complete itself. The gates closed, not slowly, not with ceremony. The pale light that had been hardening the sky for hours retracted in stages, the streams first, then the aperture itself narrowing to a line, and then to nothing. The surgical cold lifted from the air. The rust red returned imperfect and overloud and entirely familiar. In the southeast corridor, the exorcists had stopped. They stood in their formations, receiving whatever instruction was being transmitted through their communication channels. And then one group, then another, then the rest, they began to withdraw. Not in a rout, not in panic. In the controlled, deliberate movement of a force that has received an order it did not anticipate and is executing it with professional discipline while the implications are still being processed at higher levels. Heaven's retreat was orderly. Heaven's retreat was also for the first time in anyone in Pentagram City's living memory, happening before the count was finished. The city did not erupt in celebration. It did not know yet exactly what had happened. What it knew was that the sound was gone, the cold was gone, and the white-armored figures were no longer in the streets. It knew this, and it held very still, with the particular stillness of a population that has been ambushed by good news and does not yet trust it. On the street outside the Hazbin hotel, Vegeta stood and looked at the sky from which the gates had closed. The anchor points were gone now, retracted with the connection. But he had mapped them. Position, angle, depth of field relative to local geography. The information was complete. Fixed, he had noted earlier. Predictable. Now a third word joined them, settling into place with the certainty of a conclusion that had been true since the moment he arrived and had simply been waiting for him to confirm it. Breakable. Charlie opened the hotel door. She stepped out, looked at the empty street, at the dust, still settling from the impact 3 blocks over, at Vegeta standing in the middle of the road with his back to her. She looked at all of this for a long moment. Vaggie appeared at her shoulder, took in the same view, kept quiet for several seconds. He stopped it. Charlie noted her voice careful, measuring each word before releasing it. Yes. He actually... She stopped. They left. They all left. Yes. Charlie looked down at her hands, then back at the street, then at the figure standing in it. She was afraid of him. That was not a new development. She had been aware of what he represented since the first night on the roof. But the fear had been abstract before manageable, the theoretical awareness of a threat that had not acted. Now it was concrete and real. This was a person who had just ended something that had been ending them year after year, and he had done it in the time it takes to draw a breath. That was not comforting. It was a different category of feeling entirely one, without a clean name. What happens when they come back? She asked. Not the city, not the shelter points, she meant. Heaven, she meant the system that ran the schedule. She meant the part of this that had not been resolved by one purple beam and a man walking away from the wreckage. Vaggie considered this. Ask him. From a doorway across the street, half hidden by shadow, Alistair watched the empty avenue with the expression of a man who has just attended the finest performance of his decade. His smile, for once, was not managed. It was the unguarded look of genuine aesthetic pleasure, the expression of a connoisseur who has found exactly what he did not know he was looking for. He stayed quiet. He did not need to speak. The street spoke for him. The rumor traveled faster than the exorcists had. By dawn, which in Pentagram City meant the sky shifting from dried rust to a slightly brighter version of the same color, the story had mutated through 17 different versions across every block of the Pride Ring. In its most stripped-down form, it went the angels came, and someone made them leave. In its more elaborate iterations, it involved a new overlord, a secret weapon, a deal with an unknown power, a coup against Lucifer. And in one version, circulating near the casino district, a promotional stunt by a rival broadcast network. The version that moved fastest was the one nobody wanted to say aloud, but everybody was thinking the schedule broke. Somewhere between the 3rd and 7th, telling a vendor on Brimstone Boulevard had already pivoted. A hand-painted sign appeared above his cart. Extermination-proof deadbolts, angel-tested limited stock. Whether they worked was not the point. The point was that in Pentagram City, a crisis and a commerce opportunity were the same event viewed from different angles. The shelter points began releasing their populations in waves through the early hours, each group emerging, blinking into streets that were against all precedent still standing. No visible damage from Heaven's forces, no count incomplete. The exorcist corridors had been swept clean of their occupants. The southeast quarter, which typically absorbed the worst of the annual pass, looked exactly as it had the night before, which was to say chaotic and derelict and entirely intact. This should have been good news. For about 40 minutes it was. Then hell remembered. It was hell. The first incidents were opportunistic. 3 businesses in the northeast quarter. 2 of them run by demons who had operated under tacit protection from a mid-level overlord whose power derived partly from his reputation as an extermination survivor, were looted before the shelter points had fully cleared. The overlord in question, whose reputation was no longer quite the asset it had been when survival was rare, found his protection fees declining in real time. Across the canal, a grudge that had been suspended for 11 months by the mutual understanding that extermination would settle it eventually was now back on the table. The 2 parties involved resolved it loudly, at length, with structural damage to adjacent properties. In the residential blocks nearest the hotel, a cluster of sinners who had been sheltering together, people who had spent the night in enforced proximity and emerged to find the threat removed, fractured along every existing fault line with the speed of pressure being released. Arguments, old debts, territory disputes that the extermination cycle had been conveniently compressing into dormancy. The city was not celebrating. It was exhaling, and the exhale was jagged. Charlie heard it from inside the hotel and understood it before she opened the door. "It's going sideways," she told Vaggie, who was already at the window. "It went sideways 10 minutes ago." Vaggie had her spear in hand. Her eyes were doing the fast tactical inventory of someone reading a crowd for where the violence was densest. 3 flashpoints. The canal, the northeast corner, and... She paused. The residential blocks, that's closest. Then that's first. Charlie was already moving, grabbing the supply kit that had been sitting packed by the door since midnight, the one containing bandages and the basic triage materials she had assembled over months of trying to be ready for exactly this kind of secondary collapse. "Can you hold the northeast corner? Alone? Take husk?" A beat. He's going to hate that. He hates everything. Go. The next 2 hours were logistics. Charlie moved through the residential blocks with the organized urgency of someone who has converted shock into a workflow. She was not, she knew, going to stop the violence. She did not have that kind of power and had made her peace with it years ago. What she could do was narrow the damage, get the injured to stable ground, put herself between the escalating disputes and the people least able to absorb their consequences. Keep moving. She did this. She kept moving. There was a family, a mother, 2 children, the category of sinner, that had no business being in a riot's path, in a building that had its ground floor door wedged open by falling debris from the canal dispute. Charlie cleared the debris, got the door closed, and stayed long enough to confirm the building was not structurally compromised. She did this twice more, different buildings, different configurations of the same basic problem. Between buildings, she passed storefronts being stripped by 3 or 4 sinners who barely looked up at her. She did not have the capacity to address them. She noted their locations and kept moving. At the junction of Ash and 5th, where a group of roughly 30 sinners had collected in the kind of formation that suggests escalation. Rather than congregation, she planted herself in the most visible position available and spoke in the carrying, clear voice she had developed over years of being ignored in rooms and deciding not to accept it. The shelter points are still open. Anyone who needs medical attention, follow me. Anyone who doesn't, you have about 4 minutes before this gets worse, and I strongly suggest using them. About a third of the group peeled away toward her. The rest held their formation. That was better than she had expected. 12 blocks away, in an office building that maintained a deliberately low profile for a structure of its size. Vox sat in front of a bank of backup monitors, not the primary suite which was being repaired, but a secondary system his technical team had brought online in the hours after the relay station went dark. He had not slept. His eye had cycled through several shades since the blackout, passing through rage, and passed it into the colder territory on the other side where the calculations lived. He was in that territory now, working through the problem with the methodical attention of someone who has been in worse positions than this and has always found a way to restructure. The loss of the primary relay was recoverable. Equipment could be replaced. What could not be simply replaced was the story, the narrative he had been building for 12 hours before the signal died. The one that framed the Hazbin entity as a threat to public safety and Charlie Morningstar as responsible for it. That story had been alive and moving when it got cut. It was not dead. It was just paused. The footage from the relay station exterior cameras, he told his lead producer, who had been standing at a careful distance for 3 hours. Edit it down to the approach sequence. No context, no timestamp, just the walk. He paused. Run it against the southeast corridor damage from last year's extermination. Different incident, same aesthetic. You know what to do. His producer did know what to do. That was why Vox paid him. Then I want a voiceover track ready. Not me use a synthesized neutral. Residents are asking questions. Sources within the hotel have expressed concern. Nothing attributable. Another pause. And find me someone in the residential blocks who's having a bad morning, and we'll talk on camera. There are several thousand options right now. I need one with a sympathetic face. The producer left. Vox turned back to his monitors. The brawl near the canal was on one feed, the residential escalation on another, the Hazbin Hotel quiet at its center on a third. He watched all three with the professional attention of a man who knows that chaos properly framed is content. He had lost the first round. He had no intention of losing the structure of the war. Vegeta was on the roof again. He had watched the city's post-extermination decomposition with the detached attention of someone observing a predictable chemical reaction. No surprise in it. Remove an external pressure from a compressed system, and the system expands violently. Basic physics, no particular insight required. He had seen this pattern on worlds that had nothing else in common with each other. Below the residential blocks were audible even at this altitude. Impacts. Raised voices. The specific acoustic signature of a mob that has not yet found its focus, but is looking for one. He scanned the streets with the patience of someone who is not anxious, but is waiting for a specific condition to be met. There, the junction of Ash and Fifth. Charlie was visible, recognizable by the movement that carried supply kit, the deliberate way she positioned herself in the sight line of the largest cluster. Doing what she always did, trying to narrow the damage with her body and her voice, and the stubborn insistence that the damage could be narrowed. She was not wrong technically. She was also working against a scale differential that made the effort look futile from above. A second cluster, larger than the first, moving with the compressed momentum of a group that has identified a direction, was converging on the same junction from the west. This one was not looking for a negotiation point. This one had already passed it. Vegeta left the roof. He came down through the building's interior rather than the fire escape, faster through 2 floors out the side door and into the street at a pace that was not running because nothing about his movement suggested urgency, but covered the 4 blocks in a time that running would have struggled to match. He came around the corner at Ash and Fifth and stopped at the edge of the junction between Charlie's group and the incoming cluster. He did not speak. He did not raise his hands. He simply stood there in the junction with the quality of presence that had been clearing rooms and sidewalks. Since he landed the thing that operated below the threshold of conscious decision that bypassed argument and went straight to the older, faster part of the brain that was still after everything good, at recognizing when something in the vicinity was categorically more dangerous than anything it had previously encountered. The incoming cluster slowed. Not all at once. The front of it registered first 2-3 people who had been moving with the forward commitment of a wave and found, at the moment of potential contact, that some instinct had locked their legs. The people behind them compressed into them. The whole formation lost its momentum in stages like a wave breaking against an unexpected depth change in the ocean floor. It took approximately 9 seconds. Then the cluster began without discussion to find different directions. Charlie looked at Vegeta. Vegeta did not look at her. He was watching the cluster disperse with the expression of a man confirming a calculation he had not found interesting in the first place. "Thank you," she said. "I'm not interested in thanking." He turned away from the dispersing crowd. "Keep your people away from the canal junction. The group there is larger and has been building longer. They'll need more than a presence to stop." Charlie stared at him for a moment. Then, because he had just given her a tactical assessment, and there was no version of her that did not act on useful information. How much longer? 20 minutes before it consolidates into something that will require actual intervention. He looked at her. "You have 18. She went. And by mid-morning, the worst of it had passed through the city the way fevers pass intensely, then subsiding into the kind of general ache that indicates the system has been stressed but not broken. The canal dispute resolved itself, as canal disputes in Pentagram City generally did, through mutual exhaustion and property damage. The northeast quarter stabilized under Vaggie and Husk's presence, which operated on similar principles to Vegeta's, but with rather more spear-waving involved. The shelter points, still staffed, absorbed the overflow of injured and displaced. Charlie coordinated between them from the hotel lobby, which had become in the past 18 hours less of a hotel and more of a command post. It was in this state, maps on the floor, Vaggie reviewing casualty lists, Angel Dust performing the unlikely function of actual useful triage assistance, while complaining about it constantly that the first message arrived, not a broadcast, not a public transmission. A private channel delivered through a go-between who had knocked on the hotel's side door and handed over an envelope with the careful neutrality of someone who was being paid enough to not ask questions. Inside a single card. No name. A seal Charlie recognized as belonging to one of the older Overlord houses, not the loudest, not the most visible, but one of the ones that had been in the Pride Ring long enough to have learned the difference between noise and weight. The message was brief. 4 words and a time. "We would like to talk, tonight." Charlie set it on the table, looked at it, looked at Vaggie. "That's the first one," Vaggie said. "How many more do you think there are?" Vaggie looked at the door. "How many Overlords are there?" Ouch. Outside, as the city settled into its bruised and rearranged version of normal, a second message was making its way through different channels entirely. This one did not come in an envelope. It came as a fragment sourced purportedly from a diplomatic communique between Heaven's administrative bodies, leaked by a party whose identity was unspecified and whose motives were opaque. The fragment circulated through the same network that had carried Vox's broadcast the previous night, now operating on backup infrastructure at lower reach. It was short. It had the specific cadence of official language that has been carefully constructed to say something damning, while technically only saying something neutral. In light of recent destabilization events within the lower administrative regions, the Seraphic Council has convened to review the existing frameworks for order maintenance. All prior arrangements remain under evaluation. A formal statement addressing the balance of cosmic jurisdiction will be issued at the appropriate time. Nobody in Pentagram City needed a translation guide. Prior arrangements under evaluation meant the extermination schedule was being reconsidered. Balance of cosmic jurisdiction meant Heaven was deciding how to respond, without admitting it needed to respond. Appropriate time meant they had not yet figured out what to say. The fragment reached Alastair through channels that were characteristically unclear. He read it once, set it aside, and spent a moment in the particular stillness of someone who was enjoying a situation more than he expected to. Then he smiled, the managed version, the performance, and went back to observing. The Overlords were coming to the hotel tonight. This, he reflected, was going to be an excellent next act. They arrived at 9 in the evening, which in Pentagram City meant the sky had settled into its overnight register. The deepest rust, the neon at full operational brightness, the clubs on the lower blocks cycling through their 3rd consecutive hour of the same rotation. 4 of them. No retinue, no weapons displayed, which was itself a statement, the same way that a man who does not need to show the knife is telling you more about the knife by not showing it. Charlie had approved the guest list personally. Vaggie had amended it twice. The 4 Overlords who crossed the hotel threshold represented houses that had been operating in the Pride Ring since before Charlie was born, which was saying something given who her father was. Old money in the hell sense of the phrase. Old weight. They dressed without ostentation and moved without hurry. And the composure they carried communicated that they had been in rooms where the stakes were considerably higher than a conversation, and had come out of those rooms still operational. The lobby had been rearranged. Maps cleared from the floor. The triage materials from the morning's response consolidated into a back room. 4 chairs placed in a rough arc across from 2 others, Charlie's and Vaggie's. The bar was accessible but unattended. Husk had been relocated per Charlie's request to the building's 2nd floor with a sightline to the stairwell. Vegeta was not in the arranged seating. He was standing at the far end of the room, near the corridor that led to the back of the building, with his arms folded and his expression set at the default flat, making no contribution to the room's social architecture. He had not been asked to participate in the meeting's logistics. He had not been told where to stand. He had simply positioned himself where he was, and the 4 Overlords upon entering had clocked his position within 3 seconds and not looked directly at him since. This told Charlie quite a lot. The lead Overlord, older, silver-haired in the way that is a deliberate aesthetic choice in hell, rather than a function of age with the measured movements of someone who has never needed to rush, because time has always arranged itself around his schedule, took the central chair. The other three distributed themselves without crowding. Miss Morningstar. His voice had the register of old authority, not loud, not warm, but with a carrying quality that suggested it was accustomed to being heard across large rooms. Thank you for receiving us. Of course, Charlie replied. She had practiced the tone for 20 minutes, open present, not naive. Though I want to be clear up front, we're talking, that's all. Nobody's signing anything tonight. A beat. Something small moved behind the lead overlord's eyes. Naturally, Vaggie to Charlie's left did not relax. The first 20 minutes were as expected linen. The lead overlord, whose name was Malphus, though he had not offered it and Charlie had not asked, spoke in the cadence of someone who has spent centuries learning how to make proposals sound like observations. The pride ring was destabilized. The traditional mechanisms of order, the ones that for all their brutality had provided a predictable framework, were now uncertain. This uncertainty created risk for everyone. The overlord houses, as the entities with the most investment in the ring's continued functioning, were naturally interested in ensuring that the current disruption resolved in a direction that minimized further chaos. You understand, Malphus began, that we have no interest in returning to the prior schedule. The extermination served heaven's purposes, not ours. We endured it because the alternative open conflict with heaven was not viable. The calculus has changed. The calculus changed because of him. Charlie gestured toward the corridor end of the room, keeping it matter of fact. You know that. Yes, Malphus acknowledged this without apparent difficulty, which is why we're here. And what does here mean exactly? The second overlord younger, which in this context meant a mere few centuries rather than millennia, with the careful stillness of someone trained not to show his cards early, leaned forward a fraction. Stability requires structure. Structure requires agreement. We are proposing a framework of mutual recognition, your hotel, your operation acknowledged and protected by the houses represented here, in exchange for what? Vaggie cut in. Her voice carried no hostility, just the flat efficiency of someone who has decided to make the subtext text. Finish the sentence. The younger overlord paused. For a degree of coordination. Regarding the entity currently housed here. The room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with the volume of sound. Vegeta had not moved, had not spoken. But the stillness at the far end had shifted the air, tightening in a confined space. When something that has been waiting for a specific word finally hears it. Charlie placed both hands flat on the armrests of her chair. This hotel is not a placement agency. Nobody here is being coordinated. We're not suggesting. I know what you're suggesting. She held Malphus's gaze. Steady. She had worked on this too. You want a seat at whatever comes next. You want to be the ones who can say they were in the room when the rules changed. I understand that. I even understand why you think this is a fair trade. A pause. But the answer is no. Not because I don't see the offer. Because it's not mine to make. Malphus studied her for a moment. Then he looked briefly and with great care at the corridor end of the room. Vegeta had not moved. Perhaps, Malphus said, shifting his attention there directly for the first time, we might hear from the entity himself. The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. Then Vegeta unfolded his arms and walked to the center of the room. not to the arranged seating. To the center, an unmarked point equidistant from both groups, which made it immediately clear that he was not joining either side of the arrangement. He looked at the four overlords with the inventory expression, the brief complete assessment that arrived at its conclusions before the assessed party had finished breathing. You want to bind what you can't beat. Flat, conclusive. That's the offer. Different words, same structure. Malthus held his composure. We want a stable environment in which I heard what you want, no volume in it. The flat certainty of a man who does not need to raise his voice to be heard because the room has already adjusted itself to receive him. Every deal in this city is a chain. The length varies. The material changes. The purpose is always the same: to own what you can't overpower directly. He looked at each of them in turn, no rush in it. I don't sign chains. That's a rather reductive interpretation of it's the accurate one. He turned away from them, the specific dismissal of someone who has reached the end of a topic. You're not here to offer stability. You're here to find out if I can be purchased, and if not, how much damage I'll do to your existing structures while I'm pursuing mine. He looked back once. Now you know. The younger overlord made a decision in the space of approximately 2 seconds. His hand moved not to a weapon, but to the inside pocket of his coat where a folded document had been placed with deliberate accessibility. He produced it with the casual ease of someone presenting a routine matter. A formality. The younger overlord produced the document with the casual ease of someone presenting a routine matter. A letter of non-interference, no obligations, no binding terms. Simply an acknowledgement that the document left his hand. It did not travel far. Vegeta had not crossed the distance between them. He had not moved with any visible urgency. But the paper was no longer in the younger overlord's hand, and the air pressure in the immediate vicinity of the man had compressed a brief, forceful tightening enough to make him take an involuntary step backward and find that his knees had developed a sudden structural concern. The man did not fall. He did not need to. He simply went very still, as someone does whose body has received information their conscious mind is still processing. The document was on the floor. Vegeta had not touched it. The next attempt, Vegeta said quietly, will not result in the document on the floor. The room held its position for a long moment. Then Malthus made a small gesture, a slight lift of 2 fingers, a signal to the younger overlord that communicated "stand down" with the efficiency of a language developed over centuries. The younger man straightened, adjusted his coat, and said nothing. Malthus himself was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had shed the linen entirely. You are going to cause a significant restructuring of how this city operates. Not an accusation. An assessment delivered with the neutrality of someone updating a ledger. I want to understand the shape of it. You'll see the shape when it's finished, Vegeta replied. And if what you're planning destabilizes the ring entirely, if the power vacuum that follows a vacuum is better than a boot. He turned away again, this time final. I'm done with this conversation. Malthus stood. The other 3 rose with him, synchronized, deliberate, the movement of people who know how to leave a room without conceding it. He straightened his coat. He looked at Charlie. You've built something here that functions under considerable pressure, Miss Morningstar. His voice had returned to its practiced register, but with a different texture underneath the acknowledgement, precise and minimal, of someone who has revised an estimate upward. That is not nothing. It's not enough, but it's a start. He considered this. Yes, I suppose it is. He glanced one last time toward where Vegeta's back had returned to its position near the corridor. I hope for your sake that whatever he does next doesn't make the boot feel preferable." They left. The door closed behind the last of them, with a sound that had nothing remarkable about it. No drama, no finality. Just a door closing, and yet the space felt notably different in the 3 seconds after. From a chair angled very slightly to provide the optimal viewing angle of the entire preceding exchange, Alastair let the silence settle for exactly the right interval. "Arrangements," Alastair offered pleasantly. The word landed with the weight of something deliberately chosen. Heaven used that word too, didn't it? In their little communique. He tilted his head. Fascinating how everyone reaches for the same vocabulary when they're trying to describe the same cage. Nobody responded. It did not require a response. It had been placed in the room for the effect of its placement, not for the purpose of conversation. Vaggie looked at the door, then at Charlie. "That's the first one." "You said that this morning." "It bears repeating." She set her spear against the wall, not putting it down, just changing its angle. "There will be more. Louder ones. Ones who don't bother with the linen." Charlie looked at the document on the floor. She did not pick it up. "I know." Vegeta had returned to the window. The city outside was operating in its night register, loud, red, indifferent to the meeting that had just concluded in the building at its edge. He looked at it with the same attention he had been giving it since the first night, assessing, cataloging, extracting the information that was useful, and leaving the rest. Charlie crossed the lobby and stopped a few meters behind him. She had learned in the days since he landed on their roof that standing beside Vegeta in silence was a form of communication he found more acceptable than most others. After a moment, she said, "They'll come back. Different houses, different offers." "They'll come back with harder terms," Vegeta replied. He was still watching the city. The linen ones tonight were the first contact. They were measuring. The ones that follow will know what didn't work. And when they do, a pause. Short, carrying the weight of someone who has already reached a conclusion and is deciding whether to share it. They won't matter. Still watching the city. What I came here to do won't be stopped by contracts. Charlie turned the question over, watched the same city he was watching. "The gates." Her voice was careful. "You're going after the gates?" He did not confirm it. He did not need to. The silence held the answer with the same clarity as words would have, and with considerably more weight. "When?" she asked. He looked at the sky, at the place where the pale line had been now dark. The connection retracted, the anchor points dormant and waiting for the next scheduled opening. Before they reschedule. Before Heaven finishes deciding what to call the next attempt. Charlie stood with that for a moment. The hotel around her, the people in it, the shelter routes taped to the back wall, the triage kit in the back room, the map with its coverage gaps marked in red. All of it pressed against the back of her mind with the weight of what depended on the next move going correctly. "If you destroy them," she started. "Heaven loses the mechanism," he finished. "Not the motivation. The motivation stays. But motivation without mechanism is just a feeling. They will have to build new infrastructure if they want to try again. That takes time. Time changes things." She nodded slowly. Processing. Not convinced entirely that was not in her nature, and he did not expect it to be, but following the logic to where it went. "Then go, before they reschedule." Vegeta moved toward the roof access. He did not look back. The hotel settled into its late-night register, quieter than it had been in days, but not the quiet of safety. The quiet of a held breath. Outside, Pentagram City continued its routines, without knowledge of what had just been decided inside one of its buildings, and what was coming next would not ask the city's permission before it arrived. The city was loud. This was not unusual. Pentagram City had always been loud structurally, constitutionally, the way a pressure vessel is loud, because pressure is what it was built to contain. But the noise that filled the hours after the overlords left had a different quality from its usual register. The clubs were running. The signs were burning. The ambient grind of a city that never entirely stops continued without interruption. What was missing was the undertone. Every resident of the Pride Ring understood the undertone without having been taught it. It was the sub-frequency of a city that knew always that it was on a schedule. Not a clock you could read, not a calendar you could consult, but a pressure in the back of the skull that said, there is a date and the date is coming, and between now and then, everything you do happens inside that countdown. It had been present so long that most people had stopped calling it fear and started calling it life. Now it was gone. And its absence, rather than bringing relief, had introduced a newer and less predictable element into the city's atmosphere. The sinners of Pentagram City, freed from a fear they had lived inside for longer than most of them could clearly remember, were doing what uncontrolled systems do when a constraint is removed. They were expanding in every direction at once. Charlie watched this from the hotel doorway at 4 a.m. and understood that the work was not over. The work, in fact, had just changed shape. Say it, Vaggie found her there. He's going. Vaggie had read the building's atmosphere, the particular quiet of a floor where someone was no longer present, and drawn the correct conclusion. I know. Charlie did not look away from the street. He told me last night, before they reschedule. Do we follow? Charlie turned this over, held it close where the full weight of it could be felt before a decision was made. Part of the way? Far enough that we know what happened. Not so far that we're in it. Vaggie accepted this, with a brief nod of someone who had already made her peace with a plan before being asked about it. Alastair. Alastair will do whatever Alastair does. Charlie finally looked at her. He doesn't need our permission, and he knows it. From the building's upper level, audible only as a faint crackle of radio static that could have been the ventilation system, came what might have been the very beginning of a laugh. Dun. Vegeta was already 4 blocks north. He moved without announcement, without the preliminary performance of someone preparing for a significant act. The 4 anchor positions were mapped in his memory with a precision he brought to all combat geometry. Not abstract coordinates, but felt locations held the way a fighter holds an opponent's stance, not consciously, but with the body's own certainty. He did not need to think about where he was going. His body had already made the decision and was carrying it out. The streets around him continued their post-extermination decomposition. A fight in progress between 2 groups on the corner of Brimstone and 6th. A storefront being stripped 3 blocks over the sound of breaking glass, sharp and ordinary in the night air. Somewhere above the pale residue of Vox's backup broadcast, still cycling weakly through the secondary feeds, the voice carrying the smooth, careful cadence of a man rebuilding towards something. None of it was relevant. The first anchor point was located in an open lot 4 blocks north of the hotel, a space that had been cleared in a previous extermination and never rebuilt, as though the land itself had decided not to offer further investment in structures. The ground here held a faint resonance that had no natural explanation. A vibration below the audible range, the kind that accumulated in load-bearing material over years of cyclical use. Vegeta stopped at the lot's edge, looked at the ground. Then he raised his hand and released the first pulse. It was not large. It was not meant to be large. Size was irrelevant when precision was available. The pulse hit the resonance point at its exact frequency, not by calculation, but by the instinct of a fighter who has learned to read the structural logic of any system he intends to dismantle. And the result was not an explosion. It was a collapse. the resonance simply ceased. The vibration stopped. The ground went from charged to inert in the span of a single breath. And above the lot, the pale, cold light that had been gathering along that axis since the sky first shifted retracted like a thread being pulled from cloth. 1. He was already moving toward the second. Charlie and Vaggie reached the edge of the open lot 3 minutes later, which was 3 minutes after Vegeta had gone. They stood at the lot's perimeter and looked at the ground, which was visibly different from the surrounding terrain, the inert quality of a place from which something has been removed rather than added. That's what he felt in the sky. Vaggie studied the ground without touching it. These points. Yes. How many? 4. Charlie pulled her coat tighter, not against cold. Pentagram City did not have cold, but against the particular absence of a thing that had been present so long, its removal registered as physical. He told me 4. Somewhere to the north, far enough that the sound was diminished, but not absent. There was a sound that was not quite an impact, not quite silence the specific register of something structural ceasing to function. A flicker of cold light at the horizon's edge, gone, before it resolved into a shape. Beneath their feet, the ground gave one brief shudder. Not an earthquake, not damage, just the reflex of something that had been anchored suddenly, finding itself unmoored. 2. They moved. The third anchor point was different from the first 2 in a way that became apparent before they arrived at it. It was occupied. Not by Vegeta, he was already past it, visible at the far side of the district, a figure that moved with the directional certainty of someone who does not look for obstacles, because obstacles have already looked at him and made decisions. But at the third point, currently, a raised platform at the intersection of 2 streets that had been subtly elevated over centuries by the accumulation of angelic contact with the same location, stood Lucifer. He was not armored. Not in the declarative mode of the previous visit. He stood with his hands at his sides and his hat absent, in the clothes of a man who had been waiting rather than preparing. And his face held the composed expression of someone who has worked through several responses to an anticipated conversation and settled on the one he can defend. Vegeta stopped 3 meters from the platform, looked at him. The city continued around them, the noise, the signs, the smell of smoke from 3 separate fires currently burning in the eastern quarter. 2 kings at an intersection in the middle of the night, and the city too occupied with itself to notice. This is the third one. Lucifer's voice was level. You've already taken 2? Yes. And you're going to take the other 2, regardless of what I say here. Vegeta looked at him without expression. Yes. Lucifer absorbed this. He looked at the platform, at the ground beneath it, at the faint luminescence that was the third anchor's resonance, visible to him in a way it was not visible to anyone else present. He looked at it with the attention of a man examining something he has owned for a very long time and is only now seeing clearly. This is my kingdom. Not a threat. The statement of a king reminding himself of a fact. What you are dismantling is the infrastructure I have maintained for. Your kingdom gets culled on a schedule. Flat. Conclusive. That's not a kingdom. That's a pen. Lucifer went still. I negotiated that arrangement to preserve what you called the leash a compromise. Vegeta did not look away. That is the accurate description of what you did. You can use a different word for it if it helps you. The pause that followed had real weight, not the social weight of a conversation that has reached an uncomfortable point, but the structural weight of something that has been true for a long time, being said aloud for the first time by someone with no stake in the answer, being comfortable. Lucifer did not argue it. He stepped off the platform. Vegeta moved past him without ceremony, no acknowledgement, no recognition of concession. just the forward motion of a task, continuing, and placed his hand on the platform's surface. The third pulse was slightly larger than the first two, because the third anchor had been in use longer and its resonance had grown deeper. The platform did not crack or crumble. The resonance simply withdrew from it, drained like water from a surface, tilted just enough, and the cold light above the intersection folded inward and was gone. 3. Charlie and Vaggie had arrived at the intersection's edge. Vaggie's hand was on her spear. Charlie was looking at her father. Lucifer looked back at her. His expression was doing several things simultaneously, processing, recalculating. And underneath both of those, something older and less easily categorized that had nothing to do with politics. This is going to require a response. Not to Vegeta, who was already moving. To Charlie. I know. Heaven will call it destabilization. They'll build a new justification. It will take time, but they're patient. I know that too. She held his gaze. But it takes time. And time changes things. Something shifted in his face. Recognition possibly of a line of reasoning he had heard before, in a different voice from a different direction. He did not comment on it. What do you need? The question of a man setting aside the ledger temporarily and asking a different kind of question. Charlie glanced toward the direction Vegeta had gone, then back at her father. For tonight, hold the eastern quarter. There are 3 fires, and at least 2 escalating confrontations, and the sinners near the shelter points are running out of route options. She paused. You still run this place. Show them that. Lucifer looked at the ground where the third anchor had been, then at his daughter, at her standing in the intersection at 4 in the morning, with a supply kit on her back and Vaggie at her shoulder, and the absolute settled quality of someone who has decided what she's for and does not require validation of the decision. He straightened his coat. I'll take the eastern quarter. The 4th anchor point was located at the far edge of the Pride Ring, near the boundary where the district's permanent architecture gave way to the transitional structures of Hell's outer tiers buildings that had never quite committed to being buildings, the geography of a place that had always known its edges were negotiable. Vegeta stood at the 4th point and looked at it. Below him, across the full width of the city, Pentagram City, spread in its permanent state of luminescent chaos, the signs, the clubs. The fires in the eastern quarter now being approached by a column of golden light that moved with the deliberate efficiency of a king who has been reminded of a responsibility. The residual broadcast signals cycling through their backup channels. The shelter point still lit, still staffed Charlie's map, still dictating routes to people who had nowhere else to go. He looked at all of it for a moment. Then he looked at the sky, at the place where the 4 anchor points had channeled the apparatus of the schedule, where the pale, cold light had gathered every year with the regularity of a tide that answers to something other than a moon. And he let himself go. Not fully. That was the point. Not fully, because fully would have required someone to measure how much of Pentagram City remained afterward, and that was not the objective. But enough that what he was became briefly visible to everything within 3 kilometers that had functioning survival instincts. The air pressure dropped like a stone. Every neon sign on every block went dark in the same instant. Not because they were damaged, but because the electrical systems governing them encountered a load the system's engineers had not designed for and shut down in self-preservation. The ground vibrated at a frequency that had no natural origin. The clouds in Hell's permanent overcast pulled apart and reorganized around a central column of heat and intent, the atmosphere rearranging itself with no other option available to it. In the eastern quarter, Lucifer stopped mid-stride. He looked up at the sky with the expression of a being who has existed since the first war in heaven, and is for the first time in a very long time encountering something that recalibrates his reference points. In the shelter points, every person still awake looked up and felt not fear exactly, but the older thing that fear was downstream of. The recognition of scale, the understanding processed below the level of language that something in the vicinity was operating. At a register, the ordinary architecture of existence was not built to contain. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For 3 seconds, Pentagram City, the loudest place in the known cosmology, produced almost no sound at all. And then Vegeta pulled it back, contained it, returned it to wherever it lived when he was not using it, which was the same place it had been since he arrived present patient, waiting without urgency to be necessary again. The pressure equalized. The signs came back online one by one, each rebooting from darkness like a thought returning after interruption. The clouds closed back over the column of heat, and the city's noise returned at full volume as though the 3 seconds had not occurred. At the intersection where the third anchor had been, Vegeta looked at Charlie and said nothing, because nothing was the appropriate response to understanding something, by feeling it displace the air in your lungs. Vegeta raised his hand and delivered the 4th pulse. The last anchor went dark. Above the Pride Ring, the sky changed. Not dramatically, not with the sudden declarative shift of something being turned on. More the way a room changes when a single low persistent hum that nobody noticed they were hearing finally stops, a change you only understood by feeling the absence of what had been there before. The cold organizational quality that had sat in the atmosphere like a waiting instruction resolved itself and dispersed. The sky above Pentagram City became, for what may have been the first time in its entire history of being Pentagram City, simply sky. Still rust red, still loud, still the sky of hell, but no longer scheduled. Charlie found him at the lot's edge looking at the city he had just changed. She did not ask if it was done. She could feel that it was done. She had been feeling the changes in the air since the first anchor point, and she was not a person who required confirmation of things she had already understood. Heaven is going to respond. She did not look away from the city. Yes, they're going to call this a violation. They're going to say the balance is broken, that hell is dangerous now, that someone needs to intervene. They were always going to say something like that. He did not look away either. The words changed to fit whatever they need justified. That's not new. What's new is they don't have the mechanism. She stood beside him, watching the same skyline. They'll build another one, or find a different angle, or they'll try. A pause, short, carrying no particular weight of uncertainty. They'll find it harder than they expect. Charlie absorbed this. Below them, the city was doing what the city did, loud, fractious, permanently, in the process of falling apart and refusing to finish, and the specific absence of the undertone was still disorienting, still new. Still an adjustment her body had not finished making. "What do you do now?" she asked. Vegeta considered the question. He did not give it more attention than it required. "There's always another system," he replied. "Another cage someone decided was permanent. Another schedule someone is running." That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. She looked at him at the flat, considered expression that had not changed substantially since he landed on their roof, at the specific quality of a person who is entirely at home with what they are and has stopped requiring the world to accommodate it. Hell is going to be different now. Her voice held steady. Not better. Not right away. Maybe not ever in the ways I want it to be. But different. Different is the condition for change, he replied. What you do with it is yours. Charlie looked at the city. At the fires in the eastern quarter being brought under control by the column of golden light, her father was moving through the streets. At the shelter points still running, the people still coming through them, the map with its routes that would need updating as the terrain of a post-extermination hell revealed its new contours. Her hotel was still standing. Her people were still alive. And the mechanism that had been ending them on a schedule since before she was born was no longer operational. That was not a happy ending. It was a starting condition. Don't disappear without saying anything. Not a request exactly, not a demand. The statement of a person establishing the terms they can live with. Vegeta looked at her. "I landed on your roof," he said. "I know. I'll find somewhere else to land." He looked at the city one more time, at the shelter points, the fires being managed, the sinners in the streets doing what sinners do when the mechanism of their deaths has been removed and the question of what to do with the remaining time has become suddenly uncomfortably real. Use it. Charlie absorbed this. 2 words. No warmth in them, no encouragement, just the verdict of someone who has assessed a situation, determined what it requires, and considers the instruction complete. She would take it. She turned back toward the hotel, toward Vaggie waiting at the corner with the alertness of someone who has been holding a situation together by force of will and is ready to resume. From somewhere above, a rooftop, a ledge, the precise location unspecified as always. Alastair's voice arrived. Quiet, conversational. The register of a man delivering the only review that matters after a production has concluded. The schedule, he noted to no one and everyone, has been revised. The pause after it was timed with the precision of someone who has spent decades learning exactly when silence lands hardest. Hell will require entirely new arrangements. A shorter pause. One does wonder who will write them. Nobody responded. Above the Pride Ring, in the place where 4 fixed points had held the infrastructure of a scheduled slaughter operational for longer than most things in this city had existed, there was nothing but the permanent rust-red sky of hell, unchanged, indifferent, and entirely without a calendar. Vegeta looked at it once more. Then he was gone. 3 days later, a communiqué from Heaven's administrative bodies was released through the standard diplomatic channels. It was written in the careful language of organizations that have been humiliated and are in the process of deciding how to characterize the humiliation for the record. It called the loss of the gateway infrastructure a destabilizing event of cosmic significance. It described the current state of the lower administrative regions as requiring ongoing review and potential restructuring of existing frameworks. It expressed Heaven's ongoing commitment to the maintenance of appropriate balance between the realms and noted that new protocols for order maintenance were currently under development. It did not use the word extermination. It did not mention Vegeta. In the eastern quarter of Pentagram City, Charlie read the communiqué standing in the doorway of a shelter point that had been running continuously for 4 days and was showing no signs of closing because the need had not gone away. She folded the paper and put it in her pocket. New protocols. Charlie folded the paper and put it in her pocket. Yes? Means they're not done. No, they're never done. Vaggie leaned against the doorframe, watching the street outside where Pentagram City was conducting its normal operations at its normal volume, with the normal ratio of beauty to disaster. But they have to start over. And starting over takes time. Charlie looked at the map on the wall, at the coverage gaps still marked in red, at the list of names, people who had come through the hotel in the past 4 days, people who were alive, partly because of routes she had mapped and decisions she had made, and a presence on a rooftop that had chosen for its own reasons to stand between something terrible and the people underneath it. The mechanism was broken. The motivation wasn't. There was still work to do. She turned back to the room. Then we used the time.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future video. Thank you for watching and we will see you next time.